Welcome to episode 89 of Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda Butterworth, and today we continue with the tale of Troy and the story of the death of Patroclus. While the ship on which Ajax stood had become the center of a struggle to the death, Patroclus, leaving wounded Eurypylus, had hastened to Achilles. When he entered his house, the tears gushed from his eyes like a torrent, which pours its dark waters over a steep cliff. Compassionately, the son of Peleus gazed at him and said, "You are crying like a child, Patroclus, a girl child who runs after her mother and screams, 'Take me, take me,' and clings to her gown until the mother lifts her into her arms. Have you bad news from Phthia? And do they concern my myrmidons, or me, or yourself? I know that your father Menelaus and my father Peleus are alive. Or is your sorrow for the people of Argos, who are perishing miserably as a result of their own presumptuousness? Tell me, what is in your heart, and let me know all." First, Patroclus only sighed, but then he spoke. "Do not be angered with me, noblest of heroes. It is true that the fate of the Argives weighs heavily on my soul. All the bravest lie among the ships laid low by missiles launched or thrust. Diomedes is wounded, Odysseus and Agamemnon gashed with lances, Eurypylus struck in the thigh by an arrow. None of these fight in our ranks now. They have been given over to the physicians. You are implacable. Your parents are not Peleus and Thetis, the mortal and the goddess. The dark sea or the stony mountain must have borne you, for your heart is relentless. Well then, if you were held back by your mother's words, or by some messages from the gods, let me at least go with your warriors and bring comfort to the Achaeans. Let me gird on your own armor. Perhaps the Trojans, seeing me and thinking it is you, will stop fighting and give us time to rally our strength." But Achilles scowled and said sulkily, "It is not my mother, nor the voice of the gods that keeps me here. It is the bitter pain gnawing at my soul. Pain that an Argive has dared to rob me, his peer, of what was mine by right. But I never intended to cherish my grudge forever, and from the outset resolved to give it up when the battle came close to my ships. Now, while I cannot make up my mind to take part in the fight myself, you may take my armor and lead our fighters. Rush on the Trojans with all your might and drive them from the ships. There is only one you shall not attack, and that is Hector. And be careful not to fall into the hands of a god, for Apollo loves our foes. As soon as you have saved the ships, turn back. Let the rest slaughter one another in the open field, for I should be willing to let all the Argives perish, so that we, too, might be the only ones left to tear down the walls of Troy." While they were talking, Ajax was more and more sorely pressed near the ships, and his breath grew labored. Spears and arrows rattled against his helmet. His shoulder, burdened by his shield, began to stiffen. The sweat of anguish poured from his limbs, but he could not rest. When Hector's sword struck off the top of his lance so that only the broken shaft was left in his hand, and the brazen point clattered to the ground, Ajax knew that the Argives were confronted with the powers of a god, and he drew back in dismay. Then Hector and his men tossed a huge brand into the ship, and the flames leaped up and closed over the stern. When Achilles saw the flare of fire, his stubborn heart winced with pain. "O Patroclus," he cried, "keep them from taking the ships and barring our men from escape. I myself shall go to assemble my warriors." Patroclus rejoiced and swiftly girt on the greaves of Achilles. About his breast he bound his spangled cuirass, slung his sword over his shoulder, set on his head the helmet with its streaming horse hair crest, seized the shield with his left hand, and with his right hand 2 mighty lances. He would have liked to have taken the enormous spear of his friend Achilles, that Chiron the centaur had given to Peleus. It was carved from an ash of Mount Pelion in Thessaly, and it was so large and so heavy that no one, except the son of Peleus could handle it. And now Patroclus bade Automedon, his friend and charioteer, harness the horses Thanas and Balius, the immortal offspring of the harpy Podarge that was born of the god of the west wind, and beside these the horse of Pedius, which the son of Peleus had once taken as spoils from Thebe in Cilicia. Achilles, meanwhile, called together his Myrmidons, and they came like hungry wolves, 50 men from each of the 50 ships. And their 5 leaders were Menethius, son of the river guard Sposius, and Poldoria, the fair daughter of Peleus, Eudorus, son of Hermes, and Polymele, Pisander, son of Melamus, and after Patroclus, the best fighter of them all, and last Phoenix, gray about the temples, and Alcimedon, son of Laerces. As they were leaving, the son of Peleus called to them, "Let my Myrmidons not forget how often they threatened the Trojans and reproached me for my wrath, which compelled them to refrain them from battle. The hour you have yearned for has come. Now fight to your heart's content." When he had spoken, he withdrew to his house, and from a chest filled with tunics, mantles, coverlets, and other precious possessions his mother Thetis had given him to take on the journey, he fetched a cup, artfully wrought, from which no one but himself had ever drunk the sparkling wine, and from which no god but the Thunderer had received libation. Now he stepped outside, poured a libation to Zeus, and prayed that the Argives might win, and Patroclus, his comrade in arms, returned to the ships in safety. The first request Zeus heard with a nod. At the second he shook his head, but all this was unseen by Achilles. He returned to his house to put away the cup. Then he went out to watch the battle between the Achaeans and the Trojans. Like a swarm of wasps, Myrmidons sped in the wake of Patroclus, their leader. When the Trojans saw him coming, their hearts hammered with terror, and their companies faltered in confusion, for they thought it was Achilles. They looked desperately about for a way to escape destruction. Patroclus took advantage of their fear, and cast his shining lance into the midst where the press was thickest about the ship of Protesilaus. He struck Pyracamas of Paeonia, and pierced his right shoulder. Moaning, he tumbled on his back, and the Paeonicians around him were bewildered with dread and fled before Patroclus. He quenched the fire, and the ship was only half burned. Now all the Trojans took to flight, and the Danai pursued them through the passageways between the ships. But soon the Dardanians rallied, and the Argives were forced to fight on foot, man for man. Patroclus shot Areilycus in the thigh, and Menelaus thrust his lance into the breast of Thos. Meges, son of Phileus, stabbed Amphilochus in the calf. Antilochus, son of Nestor, pierced the groin of Antimenius. Then Maris, enraged by the fall of his brother, rushed at Antilochus, placed himself in front of slain Antimenus, and brandished his lance. But Thyracimedes, Nestor's other son, gored his shoulder and upper arm with his spear, so that he sank, dying, to the ground. When brothers had thus killed brothers, Ajax the Less leapt nimbly forward and smote Cleobulus in the neck with his sword. Peneleus and Lycon ran at each other with their lances, but lunged past each other, missing the mark. When they took to their swords, however, the Achaean triumphed. Meriones hit Acamas as he was mounting his chariot, and pierced his right shoulder. Down from the chariot he toppled, and darkness veiled his eyes. Ajax the Great was intent on one thing alone, to strike Hector with his spear. But the son of Priam was a skillful and experienced warrior, and covered himself so deftly and well with his shield that arrows and lances bounced off his ox hide. He was, of course, aware that victory was turning from him and his men, but he remained steadfast, thinking at least to protect and save his dear companions. Not until the onslaught swelled to restless fury did he turn his chariot and goad his splendid steeds back across the trench. The other Trojans were not so fortunate. Many of the horses broke the poles and left the chariots shattered between the stakes of the palisades. But whoever cleared the trench sped toward the city, swirling up the dust, and Patroclus, sounding the battle cry, pursued them. Many plunged headlong, falling under the wheels, and the chariots overturned. At last, the immortal horses of the son of Peleus leaped the trench, and Patroclus lashed them on, for he wanted to overtake Hector's speeding chariot. On the way, he killed whomever he found in the field between the wall and the river. As he stormed ahead, Pronos, Thestor, Aerolus, and 9 other Trojans fell by his spear and the thrust of his lance, or the stones that he hurled. Sarpedon of Lycia saw this with grief and bitterness, reproved and incited his men, and sprang from his chariot in full armor. Patroclus did the same, and now they rushed at each other with loud cries like eagles with sharp talons and curved beaks. Seated on Olympus, Zeus looked pityingly on Sarpedon his son, but Hera reproached him. "What are you thinking of?" she said. "Would you spare a mortal who is long since forfeit to death? If all the gods removed their sons from battle, what would become of the destinies you yourself are resolved to fulfill? Believe me, it is better to let him perish in the field, to give him over to sleep and death, and let his people bear him away. Bury him and heap him a mound." Zeus let the importunate goddess have her way, but from his heavenly eyes there dropped a tear for his son. The 2 heroes were now within casting distance, but first Patroclus struck Thymoetes, Sarpedon's brave comrade in arms. Sarpedon's spear missed Patroclus, but went into the right flank of Pedasus, the mortal horse, who, as he fell, the breath rattling in his throat, startled the 2 deathless horses. The harness creaked, the rein tangled, and would have torn, had not Automedon, the charioteer, quickly drawn his sword from his hip and cut the thong of the dead horse. Sarpedon cast a second time, and again missed his adversary. But this time Patroclus' spear struck the Lycian in the belly, and he fell like a mountain pine under the axe, ground his teeth, and clawed at the blood-stained dust with his hand. With the last remnant of his strength, he called Glaucus, his friend, telling him to protect his body with his Lycians. Then he died. Glaucus begged Phoebus Apollo to heal his arm, which Teucer had wounded with an arrow at the storming of the walls, and which still hurt and disabled him. And the god took pity on him and instantly eased his pain. He strode through the ranks of the Trojans and called on Polydamas, Agenor, and Aeneas to guard the body of Sarpedon. The princes mourned when they learned of his death, for though he was of an alien line, he had been a pillar of strength to their city. But their sorrow did not make them idle. Savagely they stormed against the Danai, Hector in the lead. Patroclus, meanwhile, roused the courage of the Argives, and they ran at the Trojans, uttering battle cries and fighting for the body of Sarpedon. Then Hector hurled a stone which struck Epygeus, son of Achilles, and for the first time the Myrmidons recoiled. But Patroclus, grieving bitterly at the death of his friend, dashed to the van, broke the back of Sthenelus of Troy, and drove the Trojans to retreat. Glaucus was first among them to forge ahead again, and he pierced the breast of Bathclices, the Myrmidons, with his lance. Maerenes then struck Lagonus, whose father Otnor was a priest of Idaean Zeus. But when Aeneas cast his spear at Maerenes, he missed. While these 2 were scoffing at each other, Patroclus called to them, "Why waste time with words? War is decided by arms." And with that he led his men towards the corpse of Sarpedon. But the Trojans fended them off fiercely, so that the body was covered with blood and dust from head to the soles of the feet. Zeus, who had been watching the conflict attentively, pondered a little on whether or not Patroclus should die. But for the first time being, he thought it better to grant him victory. And so the friend of the son of Peleus succeeded in driving Trojans and Lycians alike back toward the city. The Danae stripped Sarpedon of his armor, and Patroclus was just about to hand it over to the Myrmidons, when at the bidding of Zeus, Apollo descended from the mountains, took the body on his shoulders, and bore it away to the shores of the Scamander. Here he washed it in the clear water, anointed it with ambrosia, and gave it to Sleep and Death, the twin brothers. High they rose on their wings and carried it to the native land of Lycia. But Patroclus, driven by fate, exhorted his charioteer to greater speed, and raced after the Trojans and Lycians straight to his own destruction. 9 Trojans he slew and stripped of their armor. And he piled his lance with a hand so savage and sure that he would have conquered Troy with all towers, had not Apollo stood on the highest rampart, intent on saving the Trojans and destroying the hero. 3 times the son of Menetius scaled the wall, and 3 times Apollo held out toward him the shield of his immortal hand and cried, "Go back!" And knowing this for the command of a god, Patroclus withdrew in haste. At the Scaean gates, fleeing Hector stopped his horses and hesitated whether to urge them back into the tumult of battle, or bid his people lock the gates and retreat behind the safe walls of their city. While he was still wavering, his fingers slack on the reins, Phoebus, in the semblance of Asius, brother of Hecuba, approached him and said, "Hector, why do you shun encounter? If I were as much stronger as I am weaker than you, I should send you to the underworld for your hesitation. But come, if you do not like to hear such words, swing your chariot around and spur the horses towards Patroclus. Who knows but Apollo may send you victory?" So the god, in the form of Asius, whispered in his ears and vanished. Then Hector spoke words of courage to save Briones, his charioteer, and he headed for the field. Apollo, running on before, wrought confusion in the ranks of the Achaeans, but Hector did not stop to slay a single Argive. He made straight for Patroclus. When the friend of Achilles saw him coming, he leaped down from his chariot. In his left hand he brandished his spear, and with his right he picked up from the ground a jagged stone and threw it at Cebriones. He struck him in the middle of the forehead, and he fell to the earth. Patroclus, calling after him jeeringly, "By the gods, a nimble man! How easily he plunges into the dust! Perhaps he was versed in the art of diving and was a trader in the oysters. Like a lion he sprang toward the body he was deriding, but Hector fended him off from his half-brother. He gripped the head of the slain, while Patroclus clutched the foot, and from both sides Trojans and Danae raged at one another, as when the east wind clashes with his brother from the south. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back with the conclusion of the death of Patroclus. Until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.